Hey, we're back online. Welcome back. We're back online. Hey. Many things. Okay, Erev Tov, everyone. So we've been discussing over the last couple of nights Av Shamirta Ashmat Kol, the possible prohibition of making noise on Shabbat, different appliances. We spoke about washing machines. We spoke about robot vacuum cleaners. Somebody asked last night about dishwashers. So we'll talk a little bit, often most of the halachic discussion about dishwasher relates to whether you can use the same dishwasher for meat and milk. I'm not going to address that point tonight. But the question here is whether you can use a dishwasher on Shabbat. You set on a timer before Shabbat. Again, obviously, operating the machine, pressing the buttons, doing anything on Shabbat would be forbidden, according to everybody. There's no question. The question is if somehow you're able to operate it on a timer. So after Shabbat, after the meal, you take your dirty dishes, you put them inside the dishwasher, close the door, and then it's set automatically. Would that be allowed or not? So
besides the settings, also they have to disable the door switch.
We'll get to the door switch. We'll get to the door switch one step at a time. But before we get to the door switch, so the first question is from the perspective we've been talking about of Shamilta, of something which makes a noise, Ashmat Kol. We saw the Rama said that we're concerned about this prohibition of things which are going to make a noise on Shabbat. Why? Because it causes a ziluta de Shabbat. It's disparaging to Shabbat that you're going to have this noise. We haven't defined yet exactly how loud the noise can be. And what we also, I mentioned in passing, but we didn't really discuss, is what exactly does it mean, ziluta de Shabbat? There's two different ways that the poskim have of approaching this. One could be, which I'll read you from the Chavon Yechezkel of Abramsky. He says like this. He says, in the Gemara that we said, Mivnei Shemashmat is a kol, Rashi said, Av Shamilta b'Shabbat ve'ika ziluta. There's this zilzul of Shabbat. So he says, Yesh lach kol. Ima ziluta hi ashmata kol atzma. Okay, one possibility is just the fact that you have this noise going on in the background on Shabbat. That's not appropriate. That itself is the zilzul. Or haziluta hi kevan dav shamilta yesh kan zilzul b'dinei Shabbat. Sheyomru sheb'Shabbat itchil hamelacha. We're concerned that this noise is coming. People are going to hear it. It's related to the idea of chashad. That people are going to suspect, your appliances are operating on Shabbat. Well, you must have turned them on. Your dishwasher, I can hear your dishwasher on Shabbat. You must have turned the dishwasher on Shabbat. And people are going to suspect, right? And he says, he proves, based on the Ramah, he understands that it's really the second one. And this is also in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and also the Shema Shabbat Kilchata writes this, that it seems to be more of a concern of something which one could suspect that somebody operated it on Shabbat. The way he proves it, the Ramah actually talks about an alarm clock after this, and he says that there is no problem. He says, Everybody why is that not a problem? Everybody knows that you set this clock, you set it up from before Shabbat. So the question would be, also over here, if everybody knows, or can we say everybody knows that the noise was there from before Shabbat or not? So we saw Rav Avadia yesterday. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has an interesting chiluk which he makes here. Because, again, we've discussed different things. The first night we started talking about this, I mentioned air conditioning, right, Mazgan, and everybody said, what are you talking about? That's fine, that's not a problem, that's not an issue. And the truth is, the poskim aren't concerned, but you could have a very noisy Mazgan, the appliances nowadays, whatever we're talking about, a washing machine, a dishwasher, etc., they don't make the noise, it's not that loud, okay, it depends what model you have and what setting, but it's, so Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says the following, he says, essentially that we can differentiate between two different types of things. There are types of appliances which you have to operate all the time. You have to go, you have to press the buttons, you have to turn them on, right? And there are those which are just kind of going and running in the background by themselves. So he says, for example, a mazgan, right, air conditioning, a fridge, right? A fridge also makes a noise when you open it. But again, everybody knows that the fridge just makes a noise by itself. That's the way the fridge operates. You're not pressing buttons, you're not doing anything. So that's one thing. On the other hand, different types of appliances like a washing machine, like a dishwasher, like a radio. The poskim over here talk about radio as well. This was relevant right at the beginning of the war. So I think by now people have calmed down a bit. But at the beginning of the war, everybody wanted to know, can we leave our radio on? Can we leave our TV on for Shabbat? So that's where this idea comes from, this idea of the Gal Shaket, right? You have the quiet channel. Again, I've never really understood, when you have a Gal Shaket, you have a channel that's going to tell you all the alerts in the entire country over Shabbat. Why you want to hear that on Shabbat? I think that just increases the anxiety rather than decreases it. But anyway, But why do you have that? Because if you just have the noise on in the background the whole time, the radio, the TV, whatever it is, poskim say that would be avshamelta. That's this noise, which is because again, you have to turn on the radio, you have to turn on the TV, etc. So I'll read to you Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach the way he says it. He says he quotes the Shulchan Aruch Harav, and then he says like this. Here he's talking specifically about the dishwasher. So he says, Kevan shechoshvani shakol הנשמע ממכונה זו הוא לא יותר חלש מכל תקתוק של שעון, אפילו צלצול מספר שעות. Right? The Ramash spoke about a watch, spoke about a clock. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that the sound that comes from the dishwasher is no less than the clock that the Ramah was talking about. This is another point we mentioned, but these things change over time, right? The dishwashers that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was talking about, and the dishwashers nowadays are much quieter than they used to be. But he says, "Lachen nirei לעניות דעתי, דכיוון שבדרך כלל רגילים להשתמש בה באופן כזה." In other words, this is the type of machine that in order to use it, you have to press the buttons, you have to operate, you have to turn it on every time. And שבשבת ויום טוב אסור. Therefore, he says, it would be forbidden because of this reason, because of avshamelta. כלומר, שמפעילים ומפסיקים בידיים את החשמל. That you have to come and turn on, operate the remote, the buttons, whatever, turn on and off the electricity. מסתבר שאף אם מתחכם לעשות את הדבר. Now, again, this is a number of years ago, so he says, אף אם מתחכם לעשות את הדבר בהיתר על ידי שעון מערב שבת, even if, לו יצויר, there was such a thing that you could find a timer and turn it on to operate it from before Shabbat, מכל מקום, אבל כרחיים שמיים שסבר עמד אסור. That nonetheless would be forbidden. Right, he says, גם המשנה ברורה כתב, כלל בזה, כל כיוצא בזה, משמיע כל דאבשמלתא היא כזילותא לשבתא. And again, the Ramah was talking specifically about the Rechaim Shamayim, but he said it applies everywhere. It applies for every appliance or everything that's going to make noise. And then he says, however, but it's not just that. He says, Ach milvad tam zeh, shemashmea kol v'av she'milta, despite the fact, let's say that even if this wasn't a problem, aside the fact that it makes a noise, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, eineni rotzeh lakel b'zeh, I don't want to be lenient and tell you that it's mutar. First of all, this is Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach l'shitato, and this is the way you have to paskin halacha. You have to know the reality. You have to know what the machine is and how it works. Shlomo Zalman says, I don't know how this machine works, so I can't give you a psak. I can't tell you that you can use it. But aside from that, he said, therefore it may be that there are other problems, again, like the door, which we'll talk about in a sec. ולכן לא ידעתי מהטעם של היראים ושלמים שבמקומכם שמשתמשים בזה על ידי השעון גם בשבת. Okay, so seemingly the person who asked the question was from a community whereby they did receive a heter from the Rav to use the dishwasher on Shabbat. Rav Shlomo Zalman says, I don't really understand, I don't know what it's based on, I don't know why they allowed it. Okay, so he is, again, this is in a section of Tshuvot that he has in Minchat Shlomo, where he's discussing avshamelta and ashmat kol. So he talks about microphones, and he talks about radios, and he talks about different appliances. So he says you cannot use the dishwasher. A, it makes too much noise. B, there may be other issues. Now we fast forward a number of years, because as I've said, I've mentioned a number of times since Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's day, the dishwashers are much quieter. And most of the poskim nowadays, you look at this, are not really concerned anymore in terms of avshamelta, because in terms of ashmat kol. Because number one, according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's not a problem at all, as we've seen. Number two, according to the Ramah, if it's a situation of hefsed, whatever, you can rely on it. And we said that the noise level that's coming is not so great. And nowadays, everybody knows that you could have it on Shabbat, right? We have timers for all sorts of appliances. So in terms of that, the poskim are not concerned. The poskim are, however, concerned about something else, which was mentioned, which is about the door. There's a few issues that are brought up, the issue of bishul and a few other things. But essentially, the main problem is that how do the dishwashers work? That most of them have a safety mechanism and there's a lock, and it's only when the door is locked, only when you've closed the door, that the dishwasher is going to operate, which makes a lot of sense, because if you could open it, the person didn't know, by mistake, mid-wash, you open it and boiling water spills out, that's going to be very, very dangerous. And that's why these machines are designed in such a way, with such a mechanism. But essentially what that means is you can set the timer from before Shabbat, but if you don't close the door on Shabbat, right, the timer, it won't operate, it won't start. So you are essentially causing, directly, indirectly, however we say, but you are causing that operation to take place by closing the door. And this is what all the poskim are concerned for this. So therefore, Machon Somet developed a mechanism whereby you can bypass this. I don't know exactly how it works, but some sort of a magnet which you place on the door, and it's they have on the dishwashers. And in that way, what it does is it stops the locking mechanism. In other words, the dishwasher would work. Theoretically, you could open the door while it's on. Obviously, with this, you have to be very, very careful not to open the door while it's on, right? And there are those who even say chamira sakanta meisura, right? There's a danger here which is more than a prohibition, and there are those who want to say that that's a concern. As I say, Machon Somet were quite so they are lenient in this matter. Rav Rosen and Abba Shalom, who was the founder and the first director of Machon Somet, he has a tshuva. He writes about this, and he says similar to what we said a couple of nights ago when we spoke about the robot vacuum cleaner. I mean, everybody wanted to say it's asur. And everyone said, wait, maybe it's mutar. Maybe it's going to increase our onik Shabbat. Maybe it's going to increase the kavod Shabbat, right? So Rav Rosen says the same thing. He says using a dishwasher, not only is it allowed, he says it's recommended. Again, if you do it in the proper way and you have all the things, but he says recommended. And he says why? So listen to this. He says, Hashimush b'madiach kelim b'Shabbat, be'emtzaut sha'on Shabbat, enenu rak mutar, el afilu mumlatz. מי שרגיל כל השבוע להשתמש מדיח כלים, ודווקא בשבת צריך להדיח את הכלים בידיו, זוהי פגיעה עבורו מצוות עונג שבת. It's the story you told me. He says, first of all, if every day you are washing your dishes, just sticking them in the dishwasher, and on Shabbat you have to stand, slaving over the sink, washing all the dishes. That's a pgiya b'oneg Shabbat. Number one. He says, number two, not everybody knows all the halachot. Not everybody knows, and you can come to an issur of schita very easily if you use the wrong sponges and things. So he says, therefore, it's better to use the dishwasher. But of course, there are a number of conditions. One has to have this mechanism, which is involved. That's going to deactivate the door lock. One has to be very, very careful. He also recommends that the soap should be put in the dishwasher before Shabbat, etc. So on Machon Somet's website, they have a whole explanation and in terms of what to do and how you can use it. But that is the bottom line. In terms of the Avsha Milta, again, nowadays, in terms of that specific concern, for the reasons we've said, the poskim are less concerned when it comes to the dishwasher. Rabbi Kenigsberg Mincha Maariv Shiur